Welcome to Messy Christian Mamas. We are three Christian moms with a progressive mindset and loving hearts and minds. We are imperfect humans, but we're all loved in God's sight. At some point, we've all felt like the church and Christianity may not have been for us, but God isn't looking for perfection. He's just looking for you.
We are not experts in Christian theology, and we do not represent any particular Christian faith or church. We are simply here to be authentic, and we hope you join us on this journey.
Hello, welcome back to Messy Christian Mamas. We are here for this episode. We might be stepping into it this time. Let's see how this goes. But we're talking today about we're launching this the day after the 4th of July, so we're talking about patriotism and what it means to be Christian and navigating that in this really charged political environment we all find ourselves in right now. So here we are. Let's dive into it.
And we have a special guest. Andrea, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Andrea. I lived in Georgia most of my life. Was gone in the military for a while, moved back here in 2014.
Fantastic. And she is also a mom, and she's Christian, and I don't know
if
you're as messy as we are, but...
I keep it together a little more now because he's old enough to handle his own mess.
Oh, so there's a light at the end of that tunnel for us, too. Well, I hope everybody had a fun and safe 4th of July. We haven't, in real time, as we're recording this, have not actually gotten there yet, but hope that you two do have a fun and safe 4th of July when we do reach that point in time. So thought we would kick off this conversation today with, let's just talk about patriotism for a minute. The idea that this word or this idea has become so charged in our current culture. I was looking up some history on patriotism and what it means, how long it's been around, and this word's actually been around for over 2,000 years.
Oh, wow.
Which I was really surprised to find out. Like, it's back from Greece, and so it's been around a really long time. One of the questions that I had about this is, why does the political right, cling to this idea of patriotism? And why does the political left seem to define itself in opposition of the idea of patriotism?
And when did that start? I watched a documentary about this, but I can't remember very much about it. But there's like a trajectory to it. I think it started in like the early 2000s of like the religious right, really grasping onto the Christianity thing and then the left rejecting it. But before that time, I remember as a child.
Was it Jesus Camp?
No, I don't know. Okay. I can remember. But I remember as a child, like it was not that polarized. That like my family's always been like just like hippies to the core, and but they were also very patriotic, and we loved the 4th of July, and so there wasn't this weird like chasm between the two. It's strange.
Right. I definitely think there's more of that now, that fear of being a patriot, because it sounds like you're like a nationalist or like in that kind of space, and it's like, no, I'm not that crazy. I'm glad to be in America.
Well, I mean, how do you feel about being American?
Oh,
yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Question.
Right.
I'll start. I truly am proud to be an American. I've wrestled with this idea for a lot of years, I would say, and I find myself now having a better understanding of who I am as a Christian, being really happy to also be American. We've had episodes in the past where we talked about, exploring other religions and how if we grew up in other places and other countries, we may not have had the same freedoms to do those things.
Right.
Luckily, we are, for better or worse, I guess, in a place where Christianity is the most popular religion, and so there's certainly freedom to explore Christianity here. But I do feel proud to be in a place that was created to welcome people of different religions and races, and I think that that's a pretty cool thing to be in a place that does that. I think that There's so much to unpack here. What do you two have to say about it?
Yeah, I agree that, like, I really love, like, our founding principles in the Constitution, and I love that we have this, like, set in place so we can go back and reevaluate it and all this, and, like, the principles on, like, John Locke and all that. But yeah, just, like, the principles of, like, of freedom, absolutely, for sure. I guess, but when you first asked that, and I was like, we were just talking about the debates and just, like, how I feel like we're in such a mess, and, like, capitalism is, like, in such a mess that I feel like a lot of our liberties are being threatened at the moment, and so it's just very, it's so precarious.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you would have asked me that question a handful of years ago, it would have been a lot easier to just be like, yeah, I'm proud to be an American, you know? I remember as a kid, like, when the Olympics came to town, I'm walking around my Team USA red, white, and blue windsuit thinking I was amazing, you know? But I think right now, it is that harder thing just because we see a lot of things happening politically, socially, that is kind of, I don't know, almost embarrassing then to tell other people that, like, oh, that's my country, the ones that are messing that up right now.
It's interesting. It's interesting that, you know, I know a lot of content creators from the UK talk about the perception of Americans over there, and that they think of us as, like, just blowhards, like, just really loud.
And all cowboys.
Yeah, all cowboys. Yeah. Well, so I have the lyrics to America the Beautiful. If you will indulge me for a minute, I'd love to just read some of these, if you don't mind. America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet, whose stern, impassioned stress a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty and law. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country love, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine. O beautiful for patriot dream, that sees beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Whew, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of good in there, but there's also a lot of challenging ideas in here, I think. Like, we all want God to give his grace to all of us, right? That's one gift we know that we all have just by it's our birthright, that God will give us his grace. And so we wish that for our country as well. I think the idea that it is a thoroughfare for freedom is a really beautiful idea. America is that. God mend thine every flaw. So we are admitting, even here, that America is not perfection, that it is flawed, that there is flaw in what has been created in our country. But what gets really challenging for me is when we start talking about thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears, that we are still a gleaming bright nation despite the strife, despite the human sacrifice, despite the human toil. And that, I think, maybe for me strikes one of the most challenging chords that I find in our country today.
Well, it makes me think of, like, united we stand, divided we fall, and, like, are we at all united? You know, like, what are some things that we are so united on? I mean, I think, like, individualism, we all value the individual, and we value, like, each person's ability to, like, rise and, like, make your life better. And America gives you that opportunity to do that. But I mean, what else are we unified in?
I know, it's tough. I think even the idea of freedom is, people define that in so many different ways right now, right? Like, freedom for me not freedom for you,
right?
Is
right.
One challenging idea I think we've probably all, being progressive, have faced and have probably wrestled with.
Right. It also makes me think of just the idea of like everything that we have here that's coming on the back of people that are suffering outside of here.
Right.
Yeah.
Like all those tears that are coming from, somewhere else that sometimes is easy for us to forget about because we're like, well, we don't have the, sweatshop here.
Yeah.
So our country's better than yours, but we're still wearing those clothes. Or
absolutely.
The jewelry or the whatever we're doing.
Oh yeah, I was actually looking at a handful of different America songs, and one of them, "This Land Is My Land," I was looking at, and so beautiful. It was actually Guthrie, what's his name? Woody Guthrie, thank you. Woody Guthrie's response to Irving Berlin's other songs about America. Anyway. I'm 45.
And I have the worst memory. I cannot help you. I'm sorry.
But it's challenging because this land is my land, this land is your land. There's a lot of challenge in the indigenous culture in our own country. Like, this land was actually the land of the Native Americans. It wasn't our land either. So it's really difficult, I think, to dig into some of these, that culture defines so much of what our country is today. Like, there's a way that it was created, right? That our founding fathers wanted this to be a land of freedom, wanted to be able to welcome people who were looking for freedom from their oppressive rulers, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the reason America was created. I'm sure there are those who would argue that with me, but but essentially I think that's why America was created. And I think we just run into issues with that in this culture today, how to maintain that same idea. So maybe we should move on to the next part of our conversation. Well, so still talking a bit about patriotism. So if we look at both sides of the political spectrum, I think that there are very unpatriotic things that are happening on both sides of the spectrum. So for me, this idea of "Make America Great Again," I'll start there, seems like such a wildly unpatriotic statement to make. That notion is so unpatriotic, saying that where you are is no longer America, or is no longer great. Aren't we supposed, if you're patriotic, shouldn't that mean that you are proud to be where you are?
Right. I think already too, with that slogan coming from like the Reagan administration, which as a female we already lost like more rights under the Reagan administration than any other one, and then you bring it in here, have another president throwing the same slogan at you as a female in the country. You're like, well, okay, let's take more of my rights, because that's what this slogan brought last time.
I saw this great meme. It was like, "Make America Great," but for whom?
Right.
Like, who are we making it great again for?
And then I think on the left, I have so many people within my personal social media networks that I've gained over the years through different lives that I've led, and so many of them have threatened to leave the country. For instance, when Trump was elected, so many of them were saying, "I'm going to move to Canada." And the notion of threatening to leave the country if you don't get your political way, isn't that also wildly unpatriotic?
Yeah. Right? Yes.
Isn't that our job to make this a place we want to be, right?
Yes, and I would think to make it for generations to come, because isn't that the idea of, America leaving this great free country to our kids or grandkids, and if we leave it, we're just like, hey, good luck.
Yeah. I wonder, like,
your problem. Kick the can down the road.
I wonder how we could fix the problem of being so polarized. And I remember watching a documentary about IT and, like, how Facebook was created and Google and things like that, and how when you Google something, depending on where you are, if you Google, like, I don't know, like, good restaurants or something, like, things will pop up, like, either conservative or liberal, depending on where you're at. And so, like, our brains are being trained by computers to go in these like opposite directions. So like, how do we fix that? Like, how do we like overcome that and find more of a common ground instead of like, you're over there and I'm over here and we have nothing in common? You know, like, how can we get closer together?
It's one of the things I tell Ethan all the time. I'm like, you really want to live and prosper in a purple place.
Right.
You want it to be purple. You don't want it to be all red. You don't want it to be all blue.
Yeah.
There's crazies in both sections.
Right. Absolutely.
But ideally, you don't grow or be anything more if everyone agrees with you.
If you live in a bubble, right? In an echo chamber, it's not healthy.
Ooh, and that's one of my biggest things. I think everyone should get out of their bubble, whatever bubble that is. You should leave and maybe come back, but like get out of your bubble.
Last question on this idea that we were just talking about is, what do we think patriotism should mean?
So it should be, I think, like you just said with that song lyric, that to love your country more than yourself. To put like, but that doesn't mean to put like another person's ideas before yourself, but like the greater good of society before yourself.
Yeah, that's a very Christian ideal. Love your neighbor. Yourself, right?
I think I agree. The idea of leaving something better and working towards something better, and for that to be the continuous cycle.
I almost flinched when I first read that lyric, but I like how you interpreted it better. Love your country more than yourself. Ooh. Like, I don't know about that. But I really like that interpretation. So, what does the Bible say about patriotism? Let's talk about that for a minute. There's actually quite a bit that the Bible has to say about patriotism, interestingly enough. The Bible says to love God. Well, a couple things. First, the Bible says to love God before anything. The Bible says to give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And the Bible says that God has placed us under the authority of our nations and installed our leaders. But the Bible also has Titus 3:9, which I'm going to find the exact scripture. Give me a moment here. It says, "But avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, for they are unprofitable and worthless." So there's a lot to unpack in this verse, but I want to take just a minute to do this because I think it's a really important verse. This is from Titus, which Paul wrote, and Paul was speaking to a church, and I'll just read some of the commentary I found on Bible Ref. So it says, after giving Titus many positive instructions, Paul tells him 4 areas which he should avoid. First, Titus is to avoid foolish controversies or foolish debates. Bickering over certain issues is poisonous to the Christian life. Paul took this so seriously that in verse 10 he commands Titus to completely cut off a divisive person after giving them a second warning, which I think is pretty interesting. Second, Titus was to avoid genealogies. This sounds like an odd point, but certain false teachers took great pride in proving that they were direct descendants of Abraham. Yet God is not concerned with who one's parents are. He is concerned about our salvation. Titus was a Gentile and had no Jewish lineage. Instead of comparing family history, Titus is to preach the good news of Christ. Third, Titus was commanded to avoid dissensions, strife, or quarrels. This comes from a Greek word, Arius, something along those lines, E-R-E-I-S, referring to arguments or debates. In other words, Titus is not to be known for being argumentative. The New Testament gives many positive instructions to contend for the Christian faith. This, however, is different from arguing for the sake of arguing. Fourth, Titus is to avoid quarrels or disputes about the law. The false teachers of Crete were using the law of Moses to make accusations against Titus's fellow Christians. Paul tells Titus not to lose focus by arguing about details of the Jewish law. Instead, he is to center his ministry on the good news of Jesus, promoting sound doctrine in the local churches. So all 4 of these practices, pointless debate, arguments over genealogy, quarrels, and debates over the law of Moses, are considered a waste of time. All they accomplish is taking energy and resources away from the ministry Paul has entrusted to Titus.
Fascinating. I mean, what do we argue about all the time? It's just details.
Right.
Details about the law. Oh, man.
Right? If we all could just really focus on that scripture, I think there's so much positivity and so much agreement and alignment to be had if we could get past that.
Yeah. The argument about if they're descendants of Abraham or not, it makes me think of, like, are you a muggle? Muggle or not? Right.
Yep. Yeah, I think the Bible there's so many scriptures that talk about nationalism to some degree and patriotism, but I think that kind of sums it up. I think the Bible does say, like, you are to follow your leaders. God's put them in place, all of them in place, for better or worse. It doesn't say that they're not flawed. But also, sure, the Bible says all this about patriotism, but what does the Bible say about being a Christian? Mm-hmm. Like,
yeah.
that does not just live alongside what the Bible says about patriotism, but actually eclipses it. So,
yeah,
our role as being Christians should take precedence over what the Bible says about being patriotic. So anyway, I don't think that necessarily contradicts itself, but just in terms of priority, I think that there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the most fun part of this conversation, which is today's political climate. So let's talk about that debate that just happened last week.
That none of us watched.
None of us watched.
We all decided not to watch it.
And we are all, like, fairly invested in politics in our party and what we want politically in this country. But what a shit show. Sorry, Ashley.
I edited out.
Just I really truly feel like if you are excited about either of these candidates, I honestly must question the authenticity of your faith.
Well, yeah, I feel like I'm putting my head in the sand about the whole thing, and that's a very unhealthy thing to do, but I feel so powerless of like the direction of, like, where we're going. It's like, how can we actually get anything accomplished? It just feels very it's just very
neither of these candidates speak to me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it feels like it's just one of those voting for the lesser of two evils. And if you vote for a third party option or choose not to vote, well, now are you, like, potentially condemning us to the worst of the two evils? Like, which direction do you go?
And I feel like the people involved, it's not really the people, it's like the machines behind the people that's driving this. And, like, I know there are, like, definitely some talented leaders out there that could lead our country to something better, but it's like the machines are stopping that from ever happening.
I know. And it does feel like over the past, like, here in the recent election years past, we've had so many people, Republicans and Democrats, that were running before. I'm like, where are they now? Mm-hmm. Why are they running too? What happened to all these other people that were out there?
Well, I think that there's a really flawed playbook that both sides are using right now, and I think they've chosen a playbook that defines itself through our hatred of the beliefs and actions of the opposite side.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And that, to me, is inherently not Christian.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They all need to watch The Smeds and the Smoos. Have you guys seen that?
No.
There's a cartoon called The Smeds and the Smoos, and it's based on a book, and it's like these blue aliens and these red aliens and how they hate each other because they're different. Yeah. But then then their two, like, son and daughter, like, fall in love, and they go and, like, try to find them together and eventually become friends.
Right.
And they have a purple baby. This is what we need. We need the Smeds and the Smoos.
Right.
Yeah, I think this playbook is despicable, and I think it doesn't have to define us. We are allowing ourselves to be defined by this playbook that has been yelled at us for so many years now.
Yeah.
And
we're all so sick of it.
We're so sick of it. We know it doesn't work. We know the system isn't working. The system is not choosing candidates that we are happy with in any way. And I think that we don't have to stand for it. And that doesn't mean we can go out there and select new leaders necessarily, but we don't have to allow that hatred and that divisiveness to be a part of our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It does feel like a lot of times like you're helpless. Like, what do you do? Like, these are my only choices. I can't pick somebody else to put on here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But just trying to not engage in, like, especially like online. Be like, I'm not going to engage in this throwing out political memes that are just derogatory towards the other candidate, even if maybe I think that's true. I'm not going to throw those out there. Instead, try to throw out ones that are, actually talking about words behind them. Actual policies. Or, otherwise, it just becomes that cycle.
I'm a moderator on Nextdoor.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, I bet.
And I try to be fair. Like, I try to, because I do believe in freedom of speech. People should be able to say what they feel. Like, they should be able to have a proper discourse. And both sides should be able to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to find that line where people are, where is someone crossing the line?
Does it become disrespectful?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're all of them are disrespectful to each side's candidate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like, I kind of let that go. But when it starts getting disrespectful to the other people within the Nextdoor community is where I flag those for removal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that's always having a child that's older and discussing politics, and we'll be voting in this next election cycle. There's always that, like, him questioning, well, if we allow for, like, these people to protest or these people to speak their mind, then we have to allow for these people. So, if we allow for Christians to sit in the park and have a, big thing with crosses, then do we have to allow neo-Nazis to sit in the park with their swastikas? And, like, we have to allow this balance. And then comes into the whole, well, if we allow, people who are backers in the Republican Party to do this, then do we have to allow this kind of balance? And where do you say that one's too far and this one's too far? And who gets to make that call?
Yeah.
Well, last week there was news that came out from my home state of Oklahoma, and I know you lived there for a while too, Andrea, that the superintendent of Oklahoma schools said that the Bible must be taught in schools and the Ten Commandments as well.
I was just watching some of this stuff about them trying to put the Ten Commandments, like a poster had to be displayed in every classroom with the Ten Commandments, and the whole conversation that was going on between these. But the idea, I heard one, and I don't know which representative this was, some representative talking about this bill, who was saying, well, if you're really a Christian, though, wouldn't you think that you would want to take your time as a Christian to pass bills that are going to feed the hungry, because Jesus fed the hungry, that are going to provide health and healing to those in our community because Jesus was healing people, as opposed to spending your time and money trying to put a poster in a classroom.
Yeah. It seems like a power grab to me. It seems like it's just...
Well, I think it's more like of the PR machine. It's more of that political machine that just is owning this idea because it attracts more of a following.
Yeah.
Like when you raise your flag that says God on it, then other people are like, I have that God flag too.
Right. Well, I've taught in a lot of different schools and a lot of different environments. And I think schools, for sure, they reflect the values of the community that you're in. And there's just not always, like, in writing mandates of, like, what that looks like. Sure. But I think it does happen that, like, it reflects the community.
Right.
Yeah.
My daughter's homeschooled, so this is not a situation that I will find myself in. It's one of the reasons that my daughter is homeschooled, because I think that there can be really challenging ideas in the schools that I want to teach my daughter about God. Mm-hmm. I don't want a school to teach I am a devout Christian. I have no desire for a school to teach my daughter about her Christianity. That is not something that I am interested in any way, shape, or form. I want her to learn science. I want her to learn math. I want her to learn English. I want her to learn, I want her to learn these subjects from a school. Ethics and morals, I think, are great to teach in a school as well. But Christianity and God, sorry, Ashley, get the fuck out of here. I do not want a school ever teaching my daughter about those things.
Yeah.
That's my job.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The idea too that they typically, the same people that are trying to put the 10 Commandments in classrooms are saying, well, but we can't teach about sexual education.
I was about to say.
Because that should be taught at home.
Yeah.
But then you're telling us that religion should be taught at school? So
right.
Yeah, a lot of times parents have that same argument of like they don't want their kids to learn about sexuality at school at all. So that's
Yeah, there's
It's interesting.
It is. It's difficult, and I know that there's probably a lot that, Ashley, you might have personal feelings about, but don't necessarily need to voice in this conversation. And that is totally fair.
As a teacher.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Well, Andrea, question for you. Ashley, you had a question for her, actually.
Yeah, so I do think that like 4th of July, a big part of it is honoring people who have died for the country, who have given their service to the country, and I actually love that part of 4th of July. I tear up every parade, and you were in the military, so I wanted to hear like why you decided to go into the military.
Yeah, so that's always, I always feel like then when I like actually tell people I'm not a good example of a veteran, because I ended up in the Air Force because my best friend and I were waiting tables, and she was like, I think we could do something more with our life. Let's join the Air Force. And I thank God every day that she led me down that path, because I would have followed her down any path and it could have been bad. And thank goodness she led me down this one.
That's good.
And I only did, I served my 4 years active. I served 1 year as an active reservist and then traditional reserves. I knew after day one at basic training that this was not the space for me, but I was committed now.
Yeah, and you had a contract.
And you don't understand when you join, like, that you actually do have a voice, and like you actually could leave or change, but they make you, you don't know that, and so you're scared, and you're in there. It's a weird space. I joined. I turned 21 on September 25th, and I left for the Air Force October 4th, and I was an old person in my basic flight. Most of the men and women that were in my basic flight with me were 17, 18 years old. There was only a few of us that were 21, and we were like, oh, we know the world. We're so much older. And originally I was intel. I later cross-trained to become a medic. And it was, I feel like my anxiety was at 500% the entire time I was in the military. Because you never step away. You live on base. Your whole world is this. Like, your friends are in this world, your child is in this world, you're in this world. There's never a break from it. And there's lots of things I'm very thankful for about being in the military. The GI Bill allowed me to go to school after I graduated. Learning the things I learned. I would have never been a medic. I would have never chosen that path. The military handed me that path, and that's the path I went down, and I'm still working in the medical world today, so it worked in my favor. They take care of you. As a 21-year-old having a baby, I would have not been able to afford the healthcare and everything that I was able to get being in the military. Also, sometimes I don't know that the general public understands how little money you make being in the military. I still qualified for WIC and food stamps. I still had what the Air Force calls as the Airman's Attic, which is basically where you can go and get free things like free clothes and diapers, all these kind of things. So it's, it's a lot. And when I think of especially people who do continuous deployments, so Army especially, where they deploy for 9 to 17 months at a time, and not only are you gone, but your family's back at home not making a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a hard space to be in. So it makes me, that idea when we recognize those people on 4th of July and things like that, I'm like, it's hard.
It's hard.
It's not, ultimately you'll get to a rank and a space where it does become, and if you...
Easier.
Right. But you're, the trip we just took to Germany to see Ethan's godmother, she is Air Force. And she is security forces, so she has done a lot of shitty deployments. She has spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan on 9 to 10 month things.
Oh, wow.
Can you stop? Go. And now, and it took her all this time. She's almost to 20 years before she got this cush deployment to Germany. So, it's a lot of time you spend away from your family doing not fun spaces or, but it also makes you appreciate what you have.
Oh, yeah.
Do you feel like it gave you focus? Or direction?
For sure. I mean, it forces it on you.
Right.
But
take away all of your choices.
Right.
And you can decide what you want to choose.
I think it really allowed me to feel confident about voicing my opinion on things, which sounds crazy, but I felt like, before, how could I really have a say in what I feel like the country should look like? I don't even know anything about our country. Yeah. And then, people, now I can be like, well, you know what, I did do this. I did go here, and I know what it's like to be a military person in this, and by no means, I didn't deploy. So let me put that out there. I am. That's why I feel like I'm not even a real veteran. I never even left the country. But it's a whole different space. I think it does. It gives you that kind of. You feel pride about your country because you've seen these people next to you do these things, and you've supported them on whatever end you support.
Well, the sacrifices you're all making to work for the country.
Right. So I worked in a department called Deployment Health, and we basically made sure people were ready to go and then reevaluated them when they came back.
Okay.
And I always tell people how, I don't know how people do it long term, because it's really hard when you send this 19-year-old boy overseas and he comes back and is either physically or mentally different than when you sent him.
Yeah.
It's hard at any age when you send them, but there's definitely something when you're sending these young people, because then you're like, oh, their whole life is different now. They haven't even had a chance to be in this life, and now their life is different.
Yeah.
And so, it's, it's a whole different ball game in there, and you're doing it all day, every day.
Yeah.
So my brother actually just joined the Air Force 2.5 years ago at 28.
Okay. Yeah.
And so he was definitely on the older side.
Right.
And
Isn't the cutoff 32?
I don't know what the cutoff. I have no idea.
I think it's 32. Yeah.
But it reserves, and
he's
really happy with his decision right now.
Yeah.
I think the job that he had been in and is still in felt like he was having trouble finding opportunity, and so for him, he just wanted to make a different decision.
Yeah, I think I tell people all the time, I now have a college degree, but I feel like every time I've gotten a new job, their first response has been like, oh, you served in the military. They like that more than this degree that I have on my resume.
It's like table stakes that you have a degree in this day and age.
Right? I think it teaches you a lot, for sure. From the very basics of being on time to something to working on something all the way to the end. I think that's definitely something the Air Force, you don't get to stop. You finish this project all the way to the end. Now, I very much carry that into my regular life.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that being a skill that you pick up from being remote. military.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I love that appreciation because, like, when I think about it, I think about people who, like, people have died in wars, have really fought for our freedom. But I had never really thought about that, about, like, you know, just like so many people struggling through life, like, for our country. So, yeah.
Well, or even the families, right? So you had your son when you were in the military.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to deploy, but did you, I'm sure you worked alongside so many other people who, you know, they're growing up with one parent in the home, sometimes neither, if they're both in the military and they're both deployed. But there are a lot of kids out there that just don't get access to those parents.
It is a crazy thing that I didn't know until I joined the military. When I had Ethan, you have to have on file with the military, if you don't have, like, if you're not married and with this child's other parent, you have to have a like power of attorney or whatever on file so that you can deploy at any time and the military knows where your child goes.
Oh, wow.
They would go to grandparent or aunt or wherever they would go. Also, just military prepping you, they make you make a will right away, which I probably would have never done had they not been somebody there to do it. But, you know, they're like, hey, we could deploy you at any point. So you have to have a will. We need to have, where's your kid gonna go?
A lot of big decisions to face at a very young age.
Right. Right. Yeah, and my brother-in-law is still military. He is Army. He's a helicopter pilot. So my niece and nephew and my sister have been that military family. My niece and nephew their whole lives. You know, they're 7 and 9, and that's been their whole life of understanding that sometimes daddy goes to work for months and doesn't come home. You know? And what a crazy, like, I couldn't even imagine that as a kid. If my mom would have been like, Pop's gonna go to work, he'll be home in 3 months, I would have been like, what?
Yeah, right.
You know, how crazy that seems. And how crazy it must seem as a kid.
Yeah.
You know?
There's so many sacrifices that people in our military give to this country. So thank you for your service.
Yes.
I know you didn't, please don't say you don't feel like you're really better than you are, and you sacrifice plenty. So, Andrea, you were just telling us during our brief commercial break that you guys didn't know anything about podcast magic, about how on paper you might look very different to other people. Can you tell us about that for a second?
Yeah, I think people definitely look and they think white, Christian, Southern veteran, that I'm going to have different political views than what I have. Not that I think one side of the political aisle is necessarily right or wrong. And how surprised sometimes people are. And in the workplace, how many times you have to just keep your mouth closed and nod and smile and keep going because this isn't the appropriate time to have a political debate with someone when you're taking their x-rays. But and how surprised I've been since moving back here. I think too, after coming from Oklahoma, where again there weren't as many women in my social circles that thought or felt the same way I did, and coming back here, it's always exciting and fun to then find other women who are
Progressive.
Christian and that are more progressive. I think people get it caught up in their heads thinking we're all going to be a certain way because we're Christian women.
Right.
And we can, you know,
I think
believe differently.
This is one of the reasons that I wanted to start this podcast, right? Was because we're staring down the barrel of an election year and feeling like this system doesn't work. It's been so divisive for so long. It doesn't give opportunity to voices that are not the voices you would expect to be there, and that it's so important now more than ever for our voices to disrupt a system that is broken. For us to say, we are Christian, we do love people, whether they're liberal or conservative, but we are liberal and proud to be, and proud
also
to,
Christian.
and very Christian, and that might not be expected, but that is the reality of who we are and who so many people in this country are. I know so many conservative Christian women who very strongly believe in civil rights for all sorts of marginalized groups that would not typically be thought of as a conservative idea, right?
Yeah.
So
I hate how we're like,
sorry. Go ahead. No, please.
I hate how we're like put into these boxes. I feel like if I'm Christian, then I'm not allowed to be liberal, and if I'm liberal, I'm not allowed to be patriotic. It's like all these things. Like, why can I not be all of these things? Like, why do you have to be like follow this one way?
Absolutely. Like, you're not allowed to tell me how I can define myself, and so. Yeah, I love, Andrea, your voice and what you're lending to this conversation and who you are in the world as you're navigating this world, too, with the rest of us, that, we don't have to be what is expected of us. And I think most of us probably aren't. And so I think it's good for us to raise our voices and say, this is who I am. There are other people out there like us that feel the same way, that feel like they don't have a voice, or they're not able to find that voice, or they're afraid to really embody who they feel like they are, because it's not the popular opinion of who they should be. But for better or worse, this is who we are.
Raising kids to speak up just as loudly as we're speaking up. I think that's always a big thing.
And choose their own path. I'm always trying to get that across to my kids. Like, you decide. You decide if you're going to be Christian. You decide if you're going to be political. Like, it's up to you. Like, no one tells you the way you're going to be.
And I always tell Ethan, too, it's okay to change your mind. So, like, if you start down a path and you think you believe things one way, and then you learn or you experience things, it's okay to change. It's okay to say, I used to think this was wrong, and now I'm okay with it, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was in middle and high school, you guys might be surprised to know that I fought for prayer in schools, and I had a whole campaign going where if you know my daughter, this might not be that surprising to you, I guess, but
I think I probably did too.
On the other side of the political spectrum, I rallied people together. We did mock trials at one point in a social studies class, and my trial, I put the principal of our school on trial to get prayer into schools, and definitely not who I am today. Maybe just as convicted by things as I was back then. Again, no surprise if you know my kid, but I learned more. I learned more about what I wanted for myself and what I wanted for others around me. And again, like we were talking about earlier, that's my job as a parent. That's not a school's job to do.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So where does this leave us? What should we do? We all agree the system that we're operating in today is broken. We don't like either of these candidates. They don't represent us. We don't really want to see either one of them in the presidential seat. So what are our options? What do we do to move forward?
I think technology really does have a lot to do with it, and we have to figure out a way for us to mold the technology instead of the technology molding us. Yeah. And we use technology now to communicate with each other. We use it for social media. It's just like a new telephone. It's how we communicate. So we have to find ways to communicate in spaces face to face as humans. Actually, I think church is one of the last places for that. And you come together as a community and you talk to each other face to face and learn about your ideas. We need that. Humanity needs that.
I agree.
I also think making it so everyone's always taught, or we were told growing up, you don't talk about politics, because it's going to be polarizing. And I think taking some of that stigma away, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions that both sides have about each other because we don't talk about it. So making it an okay thing to do, to talk about politics. Now, we don't need to argue about it. I don't need to put down your side or this or that, but feeling like we can talk about it without it being such a polarizing conversation.
And try the best we can not to villainize the other side, and to villainize what people are saying, but to try to listen with open ears first and treat them as a human first.
I think that's where so much falls apart, right? Is we look at these ideas on paper and we react to them versus really trying to humanize the idea. And anyway, please go.
I think a lot too has to do with fear. That like both sides fear the other side, and fear of unknown or fear of living in a different way. And the best way to defeat fear is to like know it, like know what you're afraid of, you know, like go and figure out.
Name.
Yeah, right. I remember I hated beauty pageants when I was younger. I really didn't know why. I was like, well, I'm going to join a beauty pageant, and now I know why I hate beauty pageants. But yeah, I think like if you're really afraid of something, you really don't understand something, like go try to understand it.
Right. Yeah. I'm always pageant girl.
You were a pageant girl? Oh my gosh! What? We need photos.
Miss Midwestern Miss and Miss Southern Star.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's so funny.
It was my outlet to sing.
Nice.
It's
okay.
really what it was.
That's Miss Southern Star advocating for prayer in her school.
I had a very different genetic makeup clearly than what I do today.
I remember the pageant I was in. They asked me like who was I inspired by, and I was like Tori Amos. And they looked at me and they were like, what?
That's amazing. So, Ashley, I agree with everything you said, and I think church is really such a phenomenal answer to so many of the things that we all struggle with in terms of like our isolation and finding community and being able to to live our faith in action. I think church is such a great place to do all those things. One thing I wish more for church is that we were double clicking on our conversations and really getting more authentic about
Not
in
so
those
surface level.
conversations.
Yeah.
It tends to be surface level, right?
Yeah.
And
Speed Bumps has been good about that.
it has been good
deep
in certain topics, I think, particularly, which is a small group that many of us are a part of. But yeah, I think, Andrea, what you were saying, not being afraid to have those conversations, taking the stigma away from talking about politics, talking about religion. You know, I think that these can be safe conversations to have. Right. And let's discover within those conversations where we're more alike than we are different. Yeah. Because I think that we are more alike than we are different, ultimately. Where did Jesus say to protect what is yours? Where did he say to turn your back on those in need? Most of the people that I know, whatever side of the political spectrum that they're on, when those ideas get humanized, we all feel the same way about them. We want to help our neighbor. We want to help someone who's in need. Jesus said that the well don't need a doctor, the sick do. How are we living that in our lives, right? How are we really embracing that idea and living that in action? This is something I talked about in church earlier today. Jesus endured so much rebuke from religious leaders, appalled by those he shared a table with. And who are you sharing a table with? Are you staying in your echo chamber? And are you just talking to the same people who have the same ideas that you do and the same belief systems that you do, and regurgitating that conversation back and forth between yourselves? Or are you opening your table, your proverbial table, up to a wider audience, to people that might feel differently than you, and trying to discover how you're alike? I'm not going to sit here and tell you what side espouses more Christian values. That's not what I'm here to do. But what I will do is ask you to espouse Christian values. And for me, that means, and for the Bible, that means love your neighbor, love God, pray constantly, treat others as you want to be treated, turn the other cheek, and care for those that need it. That's how I think, that's my thoughts on how we should move forward. Ladies, any other ideas?
I agree.
It's been a great conversation. I'm really glad you were here, Andrea.
Thanks, Andrea. So
Yeah. And we missed Kaylee this episode, but she will be back for our next episode about Paul.
Yeah. So. Oh, get ready for that one.
Yeah.
Oh, Paul. Until then, bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Messy Christian Mamas. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Facebook, and Instagram. Until next time, embrace the mess, share the love, and shine your light bright, my friends.